Welcome back, mums and dads, to Sense by Meg Faure. I'm Meg Faure, and I am your guide going through the first couple of years of your baby's life. And each week on this podcast, I'm joined sometimes by an expert, and this week by an expert mum, because she is mum to almost an 11-month-old. And we've been following Cassidy and baby Max all the way from the beginning. I mean, I can't believe we spoke when Max was, I think, 7 days old or 6 days old. That was week 1. And now he's nearly 11 months. So welcome back, Cass. Lovely to have you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
How is our big boy doing? I cannot believe it's almost been a year. I mean, I'm absolutely floored by that. So how's he doing?
Well, he is officially a walker.
Oh, my word. It had to happen before a year. And actually, congratulations to you for letting it wait for this long.
Yeah.
He looked at 9 months. He looked like he was going to walk, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. And actually, I was speaking to someone this morning about it because we did work quite hard when he first started showing signs of wanting to walk. We worked quite hard at kind of trying to keep developing the crawling stage and that sort of thing. But he's been on the cusp for a while, but you could very much tell it was a confidence thing. He could do it. He knew what he had to do, but he didn't want to not be holding on. He just needed that reassurance of whether it be his trolley or our hand or whatever it might be. But no, the other day he actually moved from one place to another by himself. And he is so proud of himself every time he does it.
That's precious. So were you there to see those first few steps?
Yeah, actually, what was so nice is it was one evening when Alex and I had both got back from work. Every evening we sit with him for about 45 minutes before he goes for his bath, just the two of us with him, and we play or whatever it might be. And it was during that time, so we were both there for it.
Oh, precious boy. That's absolutely incredible. So he did it, what, 10.5 months, 10 months, 3 weeks?
Yeah. So about 10.5 months it would be that he did it. He had taken sort of 1 or maybe at a push 2 steps before, but it didn't really count. This was proper several steps. Yeah.
I'm getting into the heads of the mums who are listening, and I know that there is often a lot of pressure to get little ones walking. In fact, certainly where I come from in South Africa, there's this thing about getting children into shoes, particularly in certain cultures in South Africa, getting children into shoes, getting them up and walking. It's almost like crawling or being on the floor is seen as something more primitive, that maybe a more primitive animal would do, and so therefore walking is a reflection of this kind of more advanced primate, as it were. But actually, and so people might be confused when they're listening to you and I talking about us trying to keep Max crawling for as long as possible. And I just wanted to explain the rationale there in case anybody hadn't heard that episode. And if you haven't listened, I think that was about 2 or 3 episodes ago, Cass and I spoke about the fact that Max was looking like he was going to walk, and we spoke about how we wanted to try and keep him crawling. And the reason for that is that crawling is such an advantageous developmental milestone. Little ones are on all fours, which means that they're developing the fine motor arches in their hands. They're developing their shoulder girdle, both of which is important for fine motor coordination. They're getting the messages going across the brain, across their corpus callosum, because they're moving their body reciprocally. In other words, opposite side, one side doing opposite to the other side. And then it also develops early maths ability, because it develops spatial abilities by trying to fit in and under and so on. So there's a million reasons why crawling is a very important milestone, and why Cass actually worked very hard at trying to keep Max in that space. And Cass, I'm guessing and I'm betting that he still is probably doing a fair amount of that anyway.
Yeah, especially if he wants to get somewhere fast. The crawling is his go-to. And I mean, if he wants to get somewhere quickly, he'll go down and crawl there. And also, interestingly, it's almost like he is more aware of surfaces. So if it's carpeted, he'll give the walking a go. But if it's sort of on our hard kitchen floor, I've noticed he does less walking there.
Fascinating.
And so I don't know if now that could just be a coincidence, but it feels like he is more confident on carpet than he is on a very hard surface. Now, whether that is because he's aware that I could really hurt myself. I have hurt myself here. But And the other thing is he does much better if he doesn't have a specific destination that he's going to, if he just sort of is randomly walking, because if he has a destination, he gets a bit overexcited and starts to lead head first. And then that's more likely to fall over. So, and then he'll end up having to crawl. So
oh, very precious. Well, there you go. He's got his first bipedal milestone. His next one is going to be running.
Yes.
And then which will happen definitely before 18 months. And then after that comes jumping, and 2 feet jumping actually only really happens where 2 feet leave the ground together, only really happens after 3 years old. So we've got a while to go for that. And then there's skipping, of course, which will come even later. That's like 4 or 5 years old. So he's got a long a list of bipedal activities that will be coming down the line for him.
Can you hear that beeping, Meg?
I can.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. It's the joys of working in town. I'm hoping it will stop shortly because I've got a question.
Okay, well, let's quickly see. I'll pause for a sec. So that covers our first gross motor milestone. Before we go on to your questions, and I'm sure you do have a couple, I just wondered how things are going on the verbal front. Is he understanding language? Is he saying anything? Because that's, of course, another milestone that at this age we start to see little explosions.
Yeah, so that's actually really interesting because I wouldn't necessarily say he was saying anything, but he has noises that he very much, so for example, when he sees my parents' dogs, there is a specific noise and pitch that he goes to that is only reserved for the dogs. But then he was at a play date the other day, and my friend said, "Oh my God, he just said dog." No, I don't think he did. But she was hearing things that I hadn't necessarily heard, but I think it's because I just hear a noise and I know what he's referring to. So I am able to start understanding him in his different noises now. But the other thing that he definitely does understand,
yes,
but we've discussed this in the past, he is pushing boundaries. And the really interesting thing is we have a constant battle with the dog's water bowl. And it only seems to be when I'm around. So he was at my mum's for the whole day on Tuesday. When I dropped him off and it was just me there, he kept pushing the boundary and going to the water bowl. And I had to keep saying no and removing him, distracting him, trying all the different things. I went down to his level, spoke to him, all the things I've seen. And then he didn't do it all day. And then when I came to pick him up, he almost immediately went straight to the water bowl again.
So funny.
Why? I do not know. I'm hoping this is...
Well, I mean, I would definitely say that that's him working out that he gets attention for that. And that's because you're doing all the right things, which is the distraction and going down on his level and making eye contact, but you probably are making a little bit too much of a meal out of something that, you should probably otherwise just leave. So my suggestion is to either completely ignore it and decide that it's fine for him to do that with the dog's water bowl and just do it, maybe move the dog's water bowl outside, as long as the amount of water is not something he can drown in. And it's an interesting one because I don't know if you've ever heard any of my talks on that, but it's often one that I bring up, like the upending the dog's water bowl. It's just a thing. And I mean, my firstborn was a son as well, and that was his thing. He just had to upend the dog's water bowl. It was just what he had to do. And so we just had to keep filling it up. So option one is to completely ignore it. Just put it outside so you're not going to flood your mum's beautiful Persian carpets or anything. But just have it where he can actually do it and where you can ignore it. Option one. Option two is just move it out of his way. So like lift it up, put it on a higher level, and dogs will just have to have water in the evening or when he's not around. Because I think by going in and reinforcing, and giving him feedback on it, you're actually reinforcing it positively for him. And he thinks this is something that he needs to, continue to do, or that he gets attention from. And of course, I'm just going to wait for this airplane to pass. I don't know if you can even hear it.
I can't.
Oh, okay. All right. And of course, if you've been out all day and have been at work, then that's even more reason for him to then go in for the water bowl, because he really does want that attention. So my suggestion is ignore or take it away completely. It isn't time for discipline at this age. It really just isn't. And, it's not going to serve any purpose to be shouting at him or, whatever other methods you would want to use for, it's just not going to serve any purpose at 10 months old.
Yeah, and I think it is weighing these sorts of things up, but he definitely does understand. No, he understands signals as well. Like if I beckon sort of with the finger, he knows that that means to come to him. And so there are certain things he understands. He's definitely making noises. He's using all, I mean, the chatting that goes on. It might not make any sense, but chat. He's even got a hoarse voice at the moment because
from shouting it at somebody.
He's shouted so much. So he does. He loves a good chit chat. And there's constantly new noises coming through. He says mama and dada sometimes in the perfect situation you feel like it is actually aimed at us, and other times it's so random you think, oh, okay, maybe not.
Well, of course, language is, I think, one of the most important aspects of development. And in fact, right at the beginning, when Max was only 6 weeks old, I told you that my favorite milestone was smiling. And the reason that it is so important is that it is a social milestone. It's, it's the precursor to language, really. But language is so incredible because it actually, it is not uniquely human, but certainly the way in which we communicate is uniquely human. And it takes taking a thought that's in my head to be able to transfer it into your mind. That is what language is all about. So at this age, we know that language that he is understanding, the language center that actually is kind of rules over receptive language runs about 6 months ahead of 6 to 8 months ahead of expressive language. So he's understanding now what he will be able to say in 6 to 8 months time. So he's understanding a huge amount and he's reflecting that. The other thing that's very interesting about what you said is that when you beckon him with your finger, he knows that means come. And signing became very fashionable in the early noughties, kind of 2000, 2005. It was very popular to do signing classes with your baby. And I think it's maybe somewhat less kind of in at the moment. But it's really interesting. I actually did a signing class with my third child and abandoned it. And the reason I abandoned it was that I found that it was just adding too much pressure to what was already for me a very pressurized time of life. Just keeping her alive, keeping her fed, dealing with sleep deprivation, whatever it was, that was enough for me. So I didn't go with the signing. But little ones of his age certainly can learn to sign. And it is worth teaching them the basic signs like thank you and please and more, because they can then actually start to communicate. I'm thirsty. Those are certainly ways. And then, of course, the other way they communicate is through things like pointing. So they point at the fridge and there's a lot of nonverbal communication that goes on. What's key in all of that, whether it's expressive language, receptive language, or signing, is this what we call serve and return, that he says something to you, whether it's through a sign, a sound, or a word, and you say wait, and then you say something back. So it's that backwards and forwards, and you can think of a game of tennis, one person serving, the other person returning the serve. And that is really what's magical. And that's almost more important right now than whether or not he's saying mama in the correct context. It's that there is serve and return happening. And, I think a key stimulation strategy at this age is to actually focus in on that when he is communicating. And case in point, your friend who said that he said dog, actually going back, and when you hear a word that you think might even vaguely sound like it, to actually go in and repeat it back to them, because that is all that reinforcement of the principle that you've actually said something that has meaning, and then also of the actual word itself, which is obviously a higher level. So we're definitely bedding down all those foundations, and I'm going to be excited to hear when he says his first word that absolutely decisively is in context. And I'm going to put money on the fact that it's going to be dada, because that's what they do.
Well, and that's when he sees Alex, he does seem to say dada. But then he'll say dada when Alex isn't around. So I don't know if he's saying like, where is dada? Or we've sort of started saying things like, especially even when he makes his noise that we've realized now is associated with something, we'll say yes and then say the actual word to try and sort of help him along that way. And little things like when he's dancing, we'll say, you dancing, and then he'll look and he'll dance harder. And little things.
So he really does understand. That shows the understanding. And I've got this great video that I show in a lot of my courses that I do of a little one playing, is it called Hello Tom or something? It's like a little app where you tickle the cat's tummy and the cat purrs, and you say something to the cat and it repeats it back to you. It's a really inane game, as most games are on iPads. Anyway, but there's this incredible video of this baby who's playing with Hello Tom, or whatever this cat is called, and he tickles the tummy and Tom purrs, and then he says, "Hey-oh," and Tom comes back and kind of says, "Hey-oh," but it's completely not in a language context. It's just echolalic, which is just repeating. And it always makes me feel so sad, because actually what that baby's doing is utterly magical. It's, it's that first rudimentary communication with meaning. Hey-oh. And instead of having somebody go, "Hello, my love, and how are you today?" Or "Did you say hello?" He's got a cat just going, "Hey-oh," like just, flat tone and really no emotion. And that's one of the reasons why I am so vehemently anti-technology and apps, because sometimes parents think, "Oh my goodness, he must be learning to speak from Hello Tom," or whatever this app is called. And actually, echolalia has got nothing to do with learning, because echolalia does not involve serve and return. And in fact, echolalia is something that autistic children can do. So autistic children can repeat back words with no meaning, with no context, with no emotion really well. And that doesn't mean that they've got language at all. It means that they've got echolalia. And of course, what we're wanting from our kids is language, which has meaning, which has emotion, which is reciprocal, and which has a serve and return. So that's why it's so critically important, to really be in tune with how they're talking, even when it doesn't make sense.
Well, it suits me very. I've always talked to myself a lot, so now Max is making me look slightly less insane in public, particularly on the Waitrose shop. He has a full monologue of everything that we're doing.
Well, what's so interesting about that? Now, there was research that was done where they looked at verbal IQs of children born to different types of mums, and you and I are both very chatty mums. We both are talkers. It's right out there, and I can quite imagine you walking down the island Waitrose and talking your way through your shopping list. I sometimes do too. So we mums who are chatty, it has been found, naturally have children with higher verbal IQs. And that's was a really important finding. And the reason it's such an important finding is that your verbal IQ, sadly, is often the way that your intelligence is judged, because we know that IQ is really not a predictor of success, and it's not a predictor of intelligence per se at all. I mean, there's so many other aspects to intelligence, like emotional intelligence and nonverbal intelligence. But verbal intelligence is, because it's out there, children who have good verbal intelligence are judged to be cleverer. And children who have mums who are chatty are more likely to have higher verbal IQs. And so that bodes very well for Max and bodes well for my children. But the mums who are listening who just don't talk and who are more silent, it really is a hard kind of, it's a hard concept to hear. And what I always say to those mums is that it is important. There's no two ways about it. But what you should be doing is doing exactly what you do when you're walking through Waitrose, and that is create a monologue around what you're doing in your life. So, right, we're going to change your nappy now. Let's see what's inside this nappy. Oh my goodness, let's see what that is. Let's take out some wipes. Let's count how many scoops of formula, whatever it is. You kind of have this rolling rhetoric that goes on, and that's actually how you do develop language. So, yes, I think Max's language is going to bode very well on that basis.
And the other thing that's great is he loves books. He really just loves us reading, but he'll sit quietly and read them as well. And I've heard, that reading a book repetitively is great for that development as well.
So important. Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
And we've often talked about his favorite toys, but he has gone to a whole new level with loving balls. Like, he entertained himself for hours just chasing a ball. And we had a really lovely moment. We were at mum and dad's, and he actually, our dog there loves balls as well, and he would bring the ball back to Max. Max would kind of do this throw, I'm using inverted commas because it was sort of I don't know what you describe, but it was an attempt at a throw. Brilliant. And the dog would get the ball, bring it back to Max.
That's incredible.
For about 15 minutes back.
Oh my word.
Yeah, which is really, really lovely. And then actually, when we were at the same play date that I spoke about earlier, Max had more fun playing with the dog because this dog had a ball.
Well, it's quite fascinating. I mean, it's really fascinating what you're talking about, because play has milestones as well, just like walking and talking have milestones, but play has milestones. And the milestone that he's in at the moment is what we call solitary play. They really aren't really playing with another friend. So if there was a friend sitting next to Max, they would be doing either solitary play or parallel play, which means that they're doing their own thing, playing with themselves. They might be playing the same thing, but they're certainly not playing together. That comes later, and that's developmentally appropriate. But what he's doing with the dog is really interesting, because actually he's using cause and effect, which has actually developed now, because cause and effect comes around about 8 to 10 months old. So he's established that, which is, if I push the ball will come back to me. And that's the sort of thing that they do, you know, when a baby's sitting in a high chair and they drop a rattle on the floor and it gets picked up for them a million times and everyone gets frustrated. It's actually just cause and effect. That's what they're doing. They're just saying, if I drop that, do you give it back to me? And he effectively is using cause and effect with the dog, but is starting to move out of just parallel play into cooperative play, which I think is completely fascinating. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I was impressed with the dog as well.
Yeah, good dog, good babysitter.
Yeah, exactly. Because he's not usually quite so generous with his ball, but yeah. So that's been really interesting to watch. But one of the areas that I can't. So there were two questions actually with play, building blocks. He loves to bash them down, and he's. But I can't remember, when I was pregnant, I seem to remember someone telling me that there's a certain age where they should really get to the point that they're also building as well as knocking down. Is that quite a way off?
That's quite a way off. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
in my mind, it was a year, and I thought no way near
No. So there's a couple of things that have to happen in terms of stacking a tower. The first thing that has to happen is a baby has to be able to grasp a toy, which happens before 6 months. Then they've got to be able to release a toy, which happens 6 to 8 months. Then they've got to start to be able to coordinate, and they've got to have shoulder girdle control. They've got to have their shoulder has to have control, their elbow has to have control, their forearm has to have control, and then they've got to actually coordinate a grip to let go. And even with a very large block, to actually do that and put it on top of another block is really difficult. Now, when you're grading activities as an occupational therapist, we spend our time learning how to grade activities, but one of them is to go from big to small. So what you can do is you can start off with a block that's slightly bigger, like for instance, a tissue box. You know, put one tissue box on top of another tissue box, and that's a really big block, effectively, that then will actually balance and it won't fall off. So you can start off with bigger blocks and then obviously go down. But the small blocks, my goodness, you're only really looking at that when they're about 18 months old, 2 years old, that they're starting to actually release and let go. So no, don't worry. He's definitely not delayed in that aspect. And the knocking down is actually the important thing right now. So that's perfect that he's doing that.
Well, if he can destroy anything, he's doing really well on the development of destroying. Max the Destroyer. In fact, we were at a play group the other day, and they have one of those sort of outdoor Connect 4. I don't know if you've seen them, but they're quite large sort of Connect 4 games. And he basically moved the whole thing in one go. Like it was like the Incredible Hulk had come to play. It was ridiculous. But talking of looking ahead and them being ready, when is it that they drop the morning sleep?
Okay, so is he having 2 or 3 at the moment? 2. Yeah, so they move from 3 sleeps to 2 sleeps at 9 months, and they move from 2 sleeps to 1 sleep at 12 to 14 months.
Okay.
So he's a little bit way off, and I would not recommend dropping it if you can help it.
He can barely make it to 2.5 hours for his first sleep.
Yes. No, that's right.
But for the rest of the day, he can do 3.5, no problem. But
that's also correct.
I can't see anytime soon him being able to drop. So 12 months didn't seem that far away, and so I wasn't sure.
No. So this is how it happens. So he will stick with that 2.5 hours now. So he'll probably only just make it to 9 o'clock now, and then have his first sleep then. And then, as you said, stretch for the next maybe 3.5 hours, and then have the next sleep between 12 and 1. And that'll take him through until about 2:30. And then he's got a big stretch to go from 2:30 or 3 until bedtime. And that's typical for this age. And kind of just after 9 months, that long stretch to bedtime's tricky. And so you often have to bring bedtime forward. But as they move towards a year, they're better able to cope with that long stretch in the late afternoon. And so that's absolutely perfect. And that will stay in place until he's 12 months old for certain. And then between 12 and 14 months, what will happen is that he'll start to show you a couple of signs. The first one is that he starts to fight the second sleep. So he might go down for that 9:30 or 9 o'clock sleep, But when it comes to that kind of 12:30, 1 o'clock sleep, he'll just fight it and he won't want to go down. And then you'll start to have situations where you've kind of got him falling asleep at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which is a pain. And you can't keep him awake. His head falls into his food in the evening type tiredness. And then you can't get him down in the evening. So he starts to mess with that day. Number one. Number two, if he does go down for that day's sleep, he starts to mess with bedtime. So he starts to not want to go down at 7. He wants to now go down at 7:30 and push that out. Number three, he might start to pull back his morning wake time from 6 to 5 to 4. So really early in the morning. And number four, the fourth sign that they can show is that they do an hour in the middle of the night wide awake for no reason. So now he wakes up, he's wide awake, and takes him an hour to settle. When one of those four things is showing up quite regularly, then it can be a sign that he actually is ready to drop a day's sleep. But I would never recommend it before a year. So you would never drop to 1 sleep before a year. And many babies only do it at about 14 months. Then what you do is you don't just drop a sleep. You don't just say, right, we're not doing the 9 o'clock sleep, or no, we're not going to do the 12 o'clock sleep. What you do is you merge them both at a time at about opposite 11 in the morning. So what happens is the 9 becomes a mission because, as you said, he's absolutely dog tired, but you push him forward until, let's say, 11 o'clock. You give him a nice big snack before 11, and then he has a sleep from about 11 until 1. And then at about 4 in the afternoon, if you have to, you give him the tiniest cat nap, like literally 15 minutes if necessary. And if he doesn't have it, then you pull bedtime forward. And it's a little bit of kind of hit and miss for a few days. Some days he'll do 2, some days he'll do 1, kind of backwards and forwards. And then eventually after about a month, they then have gone down to 1 sleep at about 11, 11:30, and then eventually 12 o'clock. And that becomes your toddler routine going forward, is a 12 o'clock sleep.
I mean, none of that fills me with any joy. Not one of those 4 situations sound joyful.
I know, but they're the things that you need to know so that you know when he's showing you the signals. But don't worry, you got 2 months. You got 2 months, which is almost a quarter of his life. So don't it's not. It is quite a period of time. You've got a quarter of his life to look forward to still, and then he is going to do that shift for sure.
But then that's it.
And then that's it. And then the next shift comes. So then your next cusp age comes. And the next one's quite interesting because for some babies, it happens like at 2.5 years old. And for other babies, like my middle child, she kept her midday sleep until she was 6 years old. I mean, she was an anomaly. But most babies between about 2 and 4 years old will drop that midday sleep. And then one of the principles there for the toddler moms who are listening, you have got to keep a midday rest. And that is an important principle. So that is a time of day where regardless of whether they sleep, they have to go to their room and they can play with Legos or Duplo on their bed, or they can read a book, or they can do anything they want. They don't have to sleep, but they have to be in their room. And for any moms who have a second baby, that becomes kind of a lot of respite because you're then actually able to sleep at midday alongside them. And even if you don't have a second baby, it just gives you some downtime where they're going to have a sleep. But that's very important, that midday rest. It doesn't have to be a sleep after 2, but it does need to be a rest. So, yeah.
Goody. Just to come full circle back to the walking thing, topic of shoes. And I wondered from a developmental perspective, at the moment he's in bare feet all the time. It's summer and that sort of thing. But now he started walking, is it better to get him shoes as soon as possible or not, or avoid for as long as possible?
So I personally like the very soft-soled leather shoes. They're almost like booties, like soft knitted booties, except they're leather. And the bottom of them is generally a non-slip suede. So if you've got the non-slip suede on the bottom and the leather on the top, in South Africa, there's a brand called Shoo Shoes. I'm actually not sure of the brand or what it would be in the UK, but I really like those. But when I say they're soft-soled, they have absolutely no sole. It's literally just leather flipped the other way so they don't slip. So it's the suede side, and the top is very soft like a bootie. Definitely no form, no hard soles at this age. You often see little ones because, of course, those very expensive, 59-pound Adidas tackies that you can buy for a 1,000 rand shoes that you buy for babies that they've outgrown 3 weeks are absolutely ridiculous. First of all, they're a complete waste of money, but second of all, they're really not good for little ones' feet. So absolutely no need for shoes. I do prefer barefoot. If they're not barefoot, then the soft-soled leather shoes is the way to go. I do think that they do need them because what will happen in the next 2 to 3 months is that you'll be walking around Waitrose and he won't want to stay in the trolley anymore, and in the pushing in the shopping trolley. So then you are going to need shoes, because unfortunately there can be hazards. So it's not so much about, I mean, I feel nothing for dirt, but I am more worried about hazards, like somebody's dropped a glass bottle somewhere or a dog's pooed somewhere. That's when you are going to need shoes. But barefoot for me is something that's really fabulous for little ones' feet.
And those soft-soled booties, are they strong enough to deal with those like broken glass?
Yeah. No, they would be absolutely fine. They would be fine. I mean, a massive shard of broken glass or a rusty nail that's sticking up out of a piece of wood probably would come through. But I wouldn't, for that, I wouldn't be, not using them. I would still be sticking with those.
No, and hopefully I would see that before he'd put his foot on it. So, because I'm developing eyes in the back of my head. And
yes, you have to. He's at that age. Well, I did tell you this, but you probably don't recall, is that for me, the most exhausting period of time in my baby's lives was 9 to 18 months. I just felt like I was permanently on high alert. They were completely dangerous. They didn't know what they were doing. They were moving, particularly James, because he started walking at 9 months, much to my dismay. They're a disaster, and it's exhausting. It's just absolutely exhausting. And then they get to 18 months and they're a bit more sensible. They're a bit more human. They have an understanding. You can say words. They can, they'll push boundaries because they'll be toddlers, but it's this stage which is just exhausting. So,
well, I'm quite glad I'm moving out of the finger walking, the back breaking, having to lean forward and use fingers. I'm very glad that is slowly moving further and further behind us.
And that he's now a walker. That's amazing. Well, Cass, as always, it's been amazing to chat to you. I mean, I'm loving going back and listening to our talks from earlier on in his development, because it's just been an incredible journey to watch the absolute miracle of human development through your and Max's eyes. So thank you for sharing it.
No, thank you very much. And yeah, I'm the same. I've been going back and listening to them, and it's amazing. At the time, it seems, if there are any new mums out there, at the time it seems so horrific, but now when I'm listening back, I think, oh gosh, I'd completely forgotten.
It's amazing. And that's why we go on and have second babies, because we have selective memories.
Exactly. There's light at the end of the tunnel.
Absolutely.
Through the 17-week sleep regression, which I think is the podcast I last listened to.
Yeah, and that's a hell of a thing. Yeah, and I think that's what we all fear the most. I mean, I remember my biggest fear was a baby having colic, because I had treated such colicky babies, and I was like, oh no, I don't want to have a baby with colic. And somehow my babies didn't. Oh, James had a bit of a 17-week sleep regression, but moms seem to fear it a lot. I know. Anyway, Cass, lovely to chat, and we'll chat again in the next couple of weeks.
Yes, goodness knows what he'll be doing by then.
Well, I'm going to put money on him saying a word.
Oh gosh, come on back. Thanks, Meg.
Thanks, Cass. Cheers. Bye.